Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point in New York. I graduated in 1991. I'm here today to talk to you about some of the events that have occurred in my own life and also some of the changes that have occurred in not only Homeland Security but the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy. We are obviously within some very serious times right now here in the United States, and people are not paying closer attention to many of the things going on around them. In 2001 and in 2002, I sued several of the shipping companies that are federal contractors. They are much like Halliburton or KBR over in Iraq, who do federal contracting for the United States federal government. These shipping companies, American President Lines, Matson is a company that's been around for about 100 years. It's been running cargo back and forth between the West Coast and Hawaii. And American President Lines was a shipping company started by Robert Dollar, passed on to his son, Stanley Dollar. And Stanley Dollar bankrupted the shipping company before World War II, passed it over to Roosevelt, who used the war to recapitalize the shipping company, sell it off after the war, make some profit for some individuals and some families, put the shipping company, American President Lines, into a more or less a private trust or equity group or holding company, much like the Carlyle Group and the Chinese, I'm trying to remember what the name is CIC, Chinese Investment Corporation, I believe is the name. And these are sovereign wealth funds, and what they do is they use these trust funds to steal from the American people. I went after several of these shipping companies as a federal maritime officer, graduate of Kings Point, and a naval officer. I was a member of the Marine Engineers Beneficial Association that is also a federal contractor. These shipping companies sign what are called general agency agreements with the United States. They become an arm or extension of the United States, as does this union and several other unions like the Master Mates and Pilots. These are enormous corporations, not just the shipping companies, but even the unions who have been lent the corporate model, and they are not there to represent the individual or protect the federal maritime officers and or crew of these vessels. They are now being used to attack. Many of these unions are actually owned and controlled, and their administrative costs paid for by the shipping companies. There's a great deal of legislation out there that is to protect seamen, seafarers, maritime officers, specifically individuals such as myself, who is also a naval officer. Coming out of Kings Point, I serve on special duty in the United States Merchant Marine. My time in the United States Merchant Marine counts for my naval commission. And what has happened is that the Coast Guard has turned itself into a rogue agency protecting the shipping companies and corporations and certain unscrupulous activities to where they are doing the same thing as has been done in Iraq, where they have been falsifying claims to the federal government, much like Halliburton, KBR. There was one example where they had put in, I think it was for 10,000 meals that were never served. And President Bush stepped in and said, war is crazy, pay it. These are the type of activities that are going on, and it's not so much about the United States Merchant Marine or federal contracting. The programs at hand are much larger than that. But what the Coast Guard did in 2003, it moved into the Department of Homeland Security from the Department of Transportation, not from the Department of Defense. And when it did move into Homeland Security, though, it somehow took military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Title 10, with it from the Department of Transportation, where it was at, not the Department of Defense, and into Homeland Security. And now that the Coast Guard, under Homeland Security, is operating within the Department of Homeland Security, it is under military law, Title 10, Uniform Code of Military Justice. To be very clear, the Department of Homeland Security is now, by defect and default, since they have been allowed by Congress to operate under military law, a new Defense Department. And our Defense Department is being turned into a Department of Offense or Department of War, much like we had in World War II. And because I actually went into civil court to correct not some of these bigger issues, but initially the federal contracting corruptions within the United States Merchant Marine that affects civil defense and national security, the Coast Guard in 2003, 6 days after it moved into Homeland Security, brought charges against me, pulled me out of civil court, stepped upon my civil complaints, and moved to protect the shipping companies and the corporations and the very select group of families that were involved with this. Individuals like former Secretary of the Treasury John Snow and the lawsuits were initially brought against Matson, American President Lines, Marine Engineers Beneficial Association, and it was to be expanded to CSX and other shipping companies, not realizing the gravity of what I had stepped into and was trying to cure. The Coast Guard brought charges against me and has, for the last 5 years, prosecuted me within a military tribunal and not as a naval officer or as a member of the Coast Guard. I'm not in the Coast Guard, never served in the Coast Guard, not an officer in the Coast Guard, I'm not a contractor for the Coast Guard, not an enlisted person. I am a naval officer serving on special duty in the United States Merchant Marine, and the Coast Guard not only stepped upon and quashed the civil complaints in our Article 3 courts, our judiciary, our actual court system, they pulled me into a military tribunal, an Article 2 proceeding of the Coast Guard, where the judge is a former lieutenant commander of the Coast Guard. He may even still be active duty and doing reserve time. He is also a current employee of the Coast Guard. They used a prosecutor, a JAG officer, and they are expanding this program, the Judge Advocate General Officer Corps, and you may have seen the TV series called JAG. The Coast Guard never had JAG counsel. It never had a criminal court of appeals for the Coast Guard, much like the Navy and many of the other services do. They are trying to build all of this now. They are saying that the Coast Guard is and has been a branch of military since 1915, even though there is congressional testimony from 1946 and at other times where the Coast Guard itself declares that it is not a branch of military, and that although it is organized along military lines, meaning that they do wear uniforms, they do have guns, they do have rank, just like our local police, they are not a branch of military. But this has all changed, and not by an act of Congress. They have used the misapplication and misunderstanding of why the Coast Guard was trained on the Uniform Code of Military Justice at their academy. And their academy is not like Kings Point or West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy. It is not a military academy. It is a federal police maritime academy. And what they have done is they have converted this into, and the Coast Guard itself, into a new branch of military, not within Department of Defense, but within the Department of Homeland Security, and to shut me up not only about the corruptions and the federal contracting racketeering going on within the United States Merchant Marine. And these, you have to remember that these contracts to operate 5 ships for 5 years are a $550 million contract, base contract, meaning that if there are any growth in the contract, it would be included on top of the original $550 million. These payments are paid out in either milestone or upfront payments of $550 million. It's usually done in milestone payments. These are enormous contracts, and if they can chisel any amount by not providing things that they are contracted to do, and one of the things that I have focused on is the grievance and arbitration process, or the system of due process that is supposed to be there for officers in the United States Merchant Marine. Right now, not only are our shores unprotected, our ports are unprotected, our ships are unprotected, our harbors are unprotected, and the Coast Guard, rather than ensuring that we have American flag commercial vessels under our control and under our regulations, and bringing fees and fines and monies back into licensing fees and more back into the United States, we are empowering foreign flag commercial vessels that can be used, and we've seen, and I've brought this up before many times. In fact, we just had an event, Costco Busan, up in San Francisco last year, where the events of 9/11, the delivery systems that were used in that event were commercial aircraft. And again, now, if you look to something like the Exxon Valdez, we've had an incident like the Costco Busan, similar to one of the things that I have warned against is an event in San Francisco similar to, but even worse than the Costco Busan, that would take down the 5th largest economy in the world, California. These are not scare tactics. These are warnings that the tried and true means to protect America and its independence as a republic are being taken down, not only from within, but as directed from without by self-serving royal families, not only from England, but Italy, Spain, Austria, Bavaria, Germany. We've seen there are actual events involving the Costco Busan where there was a German crew on board this vessel before it was handed over to a Chinese crew, and before it came to the United States and collided with the bridge. There were also, I've read the transcripts from Captain Coda when he went before the NTSB, and you have some people who are not very well trained looking into these events, who do not have the kind of background that I have or others from Kings Point or other academies. The incident now most recent in the Mississippi with 400,000 gallons of oil, fuel oil, that was put out on the river from a spill where a ship ran into a barge in the river. And you know, you can see these as economic attacks, whether they're quote unquote accidents or not. The ship that actually ran into the barge and caused the collision was a vessel carrying biodiesel to Germany. And I hate to bring up history, and I know a lot of people want to think that no, you know, this could not happen again. When you look throughout history, the unification or reunification of Germany has been the central hub of not only European but world politics and world history for at least the last 1,000 years. And we have groups like ThyssenKrupp, who are now married to the Habsburgs, a royal family who has been involved in the European politics for at least the last 1,000 years, involved in and coming into the United States to where they have won the elevator contract. We have a royal family providing services to actually build the elevators for the new Freedom Tower at the new World Trade Center. And this is not the only incident in what is going on. Because I've been, we had individuals, I had a court trial, quote unquote, at the new Fusion Center in Long Beach. And at this Fusion Center, This is a follow-up from earlier. This is over the course of 5 years. This trial was from May 20th to May 23rd, where they are trying to, the Coast Guard is and has been for the last 5 years, trying to prove that I am medically, mentally incompetent. And the thing that's interesting about this is that we had individuals there like Alan Hochstetler, a good German, who testified against me as a first engineer and a German, who had no idea what he was doing. And this is, 7 years after incidents that the Coast Guard is trying to bring up. They've actually charged me with quote unquote being depressed. The other individuals, Cecil Ray, both of these were first assistant engineers. The captains of the vessel could not or would not make it to this quote unquote trial. These two individuals who were members of my own quote unquote Federal Officers Association, it's referred to as a union, but it's really not. It's a general agency of the United States, and it works for the shipping companies. It is a yellow dog union, quote unquote, that is held by the shipping companies and or federal contractors who control and have done away with the system of internal due process entirely. But you have other individuals, like there's a David Axelrod, who is on CNN and C-SPAN and other places. He has a, and I have to assume that they are relatives, because when you start to track some of these names, there's a Jonathan Axelrod who's been involved in my own situation, along with a J.P. Morgan heir apparent, Archie Morgan III, who works for American President Lines that the Bush administration is tied directly to. Hamburg America Lines was assimilated in World War II into, it was one of the holdings of the Bush dynasty in World War II that was shut down for trading with the enemy. And it was assimilated into American President Lines that flies the Phoenix as their corporate emblem. And you have to understand what the Phoenix is, rising from the ashes. These individuals are warmongers. They are members of a death cult, for want of a better word. They are those who fly the Jolly Roger, skull and bones. They are administrative pirates, and they have made their way deep into our own government. But you have to be clear on who they serve and what their aims are. There are 53 countries that are still members of the quote-unquote Commonwealth, including Canada and Australia. And you look to Rupert Murdoch, who was an Australian citizen, backed by the Queen and royal families in getting his own media empire started in a Commonwealth country in Australia, who has now used that to leverage his way into the United States and has started Fox News, is closely aligned with Clear Channel. And you look at the media empire that he now owns and controls here in the United States. This is not free market enterprise. This is being orchestrated from Europe and those who have given the European Union to the nation states in Europe and basically brought them all together. They have their sights set on the United States, on restoring feudalism, royalism, royal family rule. And you look to, and I've brought up other incidents, and these are some of the, when you look at some of the individuals who have been involved in my own situation, Walter J. Brodzinski is the lieutenant commander, the military law judge, administrative law judge, who sat in on the 9/11 trust fund cases with Special Master Kenneth Feinberg, who is not a special master appointed by the judiciary as is more appropriate or as is necessary. He is a special master, or was a special master, who was appointed by the executive branch. He is a police commissioner of sorts who sat in on and ruled upon the 9/11 trust fund cases and kept as much money from those families and kept it in the trust fund so that they could come in and raid it later. Walter J. Brodzinski worked with Special Master Kenneth Feinberg. Walter J. Brodzinski is and has been sitting on my case for the last several years and was the individual who presided over the case in Long Beach from May 20th to the 23rd, a 4-day trial where they are trying to prove and forcing me to be my own counsel, trying to prove that I am medically, mentally incompetent. But get this, this is the Coast Guard, doing this to an alleged civilian, not a naval officer, stolen medical records, falsified medical records. The Coast Guard went as far as to put a BOLO, or be on the lookout, warning or wanted poster out on me. Direct retaliation. I am not in, have never served in the Coast Guard, but it is the Coast Guard who has me as an American citizen within a military tribunal of the Coast Guard. And again, I was up against a JAG officer, an attorney in uniform. The transcripts for this are, you can Google my name on the internet or do a web search on the internet, and you'll find a great deal of information out there. The Coast Guard is trying to cover up, much like it did in World War II involving Roosevelt and the Germans. There's a case of extreme importance from World War II where I believe as many as 8 German saboteurs made it here into the United States. I believe it's called Quirin. It's Q-U-I-R-I-N. And the Coast Guard actually met these individuals on the beach when they came ashore and took a bribe from these individuals, these German saboteurs. This case is a very important case because it relates much to what is going on here in the United States. We have an Austrian governor in California. We've seen the debacle going on here. It's not only economic. We are under attack from foreign and, most importantly, royal interests who do not want to see a free republic survive. It's why they went after, and this goes back even into Rome, and attacked the republics in Rome. These are very old, long-standing families that have been at this for a very long time. Admiral Allen is the current U.S. Coast Guard Commandant. He is married to Pamela Hess of Hess Oil Dynasty, and you've seen the fiasco going on within the Interior Department that Hess is involved in, Hess Oil. But what is far worse, not only in having Admiral Allen as the regulator in bed with Pamela Hess, an heir apparent of the Regulated, the large corporate families, the large private trusts. Pamela Hess is related to Rudolf Hess, former deputy Führer to Adolf Hitler. And he is not the only one. FBI Director Robert Mueller. And I'm not trying to trash anyone from Austria, Bavaria, Germany, Switzerland. Liechtenstein I probably would because it's a constitutional monarchy, as are some of these other countries. As is England, still to this day. They have set their sights upon our country and have set their sights ever since we declared independence and then wrote a constitution. Canada never wrote a constitution, especially initially. They did declare independence, but they swore allegiance to the Commonwealth of countries. What is going on now is not only a resurrection of the United Kingdom, but a move to force the United States to become a part of the worldwide, and this goes into the whole New World Order, North American Union, globalism, privatization, and more, a new United Kingdoms of the world, to where we do not live under a free republic where we elect administrators and or presidents, but these individuals, Cheney, Reagan, Doyle, Olson, you can throw out a lot of names, and these are individuals like Ted Olson, who was Solicitor General appointed by Bush, who represented Bush against Al Gore at the Supreme Court. He is a member of an enormous law firm that is also involved in my own situation, as is a woman named Nicole Liechtenstein. And you don't get names like that from either being a member of the royal family from Liechtenstein or a handmaiden or servant to the royal families of Liechtenstein. These individuals, and there's many others that are involved in my own situation, Cecil Ray, the other individual that I mentioned who was a first assistant engineer who testified against me, Ray means king in Spanish. And what these individuals do is just like Henry J. Kaiser, who built Liberty ships here in the United States, that many of these ships ended up on the bottom of the ocean, and I would say it was sabotage, it was espionage, that they did this intentionally. Henry J. Kaiser, a German industrialist, Kaiser means king in German. Henry J. Kaiser came into the United States and gave us what we now know today as Kaiser Permanente by working with people like Richard Nixon. There are Oval Office meetings of Richard Nixon with Henry J. Kaiser. Other individuals like J.P. Morgan, who came to the United States before the Civil War, helped incite the Civil War, paid for and profited from both sides of the Civil War, actually funded both sides of the Civil War. J.P. Morgan's heir apparent, Archie Morgan III, is involved in my own situation. I would ask that you start to look into foreign and royal interests involved in our own country. Obama is related to, his mom is Ann Dunham. This is royal lineage, as is John McCain. There is no difference between the two. They are both being handed to us by foreign royal interests who, rather than using an army or a military to take over our country, they're doing it from within administratively. And that's why we see the attacks upon our founding fathers, the Constitution, the Republic, the rule of law, due process, arguments for the use of torture, trashing the Geneva Conventions and peace, and the conversion of our Department of Defense into a Department of War and Homeland Security into a Department of Defense, with the Coast Guard now operating under military law. Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Eric Shine. Please start to look into these matters and even my own case. Thank you. Peace.
Of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Same, and then volume 2.